So right before you got here, there was a spoonbill roseate in the pond in the back. And I think that it's because we've gotten so much rain here. Have you seen one of those? Do you know what I'm talking
I
about?
have no idea what you're talking about.
It's a pink bird and it's got a spoonbill and it moves its mouth back and forth like it's fishing. It's this weird
I know what you're talking about now. The pink birds, because when I first came here, I thought that they were like this weird
flamingo.
flamingo
Yeah, yeah,
that was flying. I was like,
yeah.
oh, there's flamingos flying.
Yeah. He does this thing. So he's like on the edge of this a pond, right at the edge of the pond, and he makes this like circular sweep back and forth, back and forth. And then all of a sudden you'll see him lift up and he's got like a little squirmer coming out of his, so he's
That's
eating all kinds of things. Welcome back to the dinner table, friends. Of course, this week I have with me my friend Cassie Vanecek. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here. We've been getting a lot of rain, which is part of the reason why the pond is full and we've got spoonbill roseates going on in it. But that rain caused you a little bit of trouble this week. Tell me what
Yeah,
happened.
it sure did. So, we do not live in a flood zone. It's never flooded. We live on the lake, but we're pretty high up, and that storm brought us hail, wind damage to our roof, and a
So the
flash.
hail was the same day as the flash flood was happening.
Yes.
Crazy.
So it was hailing. We had lightning hit right across the street. Like it lit up the entire house and shook the house like Mary Poppins. I thought about Mary
Yeah.
Poppins. And then, so I sent the kids to the bedroom and like, go get under the bunk beds. Let's just hang out there. And, so they weren't afraid. And that was actually worse because that's where the water started coming in. And all of a sudden they're running. I'm actually on the toilet going pee. And all of a sudden water is on my feet. Water is like rushing
Shut
past my
up.
feet.
This is
True.
like a movie scene.
It was very dramatic. And Samuel, one of my twins, is running, the ocean is coming. The ocean is coming to get us. And he was
Oh,
scared the sharks were going to eat him.
oh,
And I'm just like sitting there
Sharknado is coming.
thinking, yeah, I'm like, okay, well, I got to finish. I'm like, I'm going pee. So I'm calm and everybody's freaking out and grabbing towels. And I'm like, well, I can see that at the rate it's coming. When I went back and looked at text of like texting my mom, oh my gosh, this is what's happening in a matter of 10 minutes from one side of our house. And our house is 2,400 square feet. From one side to the other, it was all filled with water in 10 minutes.
That's crazy. I saw you online and I was like, oh, should we reschedule the podcast? Because that sounds like a lot. Okay, so I have to tell you that the money situation was becoming a challenge in our life. And we saw in the storm that there was hail supposed to be coming. And my mom, she tells me, so the hail went your way. And I'm sorry to hear that. Not just the hail, but the flood. The flood. We flooded here,
Yeah.
but our houses are lift up and kind of built in different ways. In addition to that, like the way my gardens are built, I build my gardens for flood because we flood here. Like I get
Mhm.
standing water here. And then right after the major rains came through, my guy that brings mulch brought me 2 massive piles of mulch so I can, that doesn't stop rain from going through the middle of your house. Like I don't know. That's a whole different conversation. So I heard you saying something about looking for pea gravel so that you could do some drainage things.
Yeah, so while the water was actually rushing into the house, we went outside and realized that it was actually pooling at one side of our house, kind of just how the ground had settled and our house had settled. And so thankfully, we live in a great community. So neighbors, I had called out, oh my gosh, our house is flooding. And several of the guys had come and they started digging a trench. So
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have a French drain
yeah.
that was dug literally that day. That they had pickaxes out there and
Wow.
because they were all trying to divert the water from going more into the house and to go away from the house. So yeah, so we're gonna have a French drain.
I love that about you, and I wanna talk about that resiliency part of it, but you're magical with people, like, and I always think I'm magical with the network too, but I see you I think that's what we like about each other so much, that we're magical with the network, that all of a sudden, like, the team shows up. I love that about us. I
Yeah.
love that, like, unique part about us being able to, like, create this network that supports us during hard times.
Well, it's like it's magnetism, and it's that people are drawn to us and our energy and our just we're happy go lucky resilient women, and
Mhm.
it draws people in because they want to be like that even though they may not realize it. They are drawn to, wow, I really like the way they operate.
And not being afraid to ask for help. Like, I think that that's a huge part of it. I'm not afraid
Yeah.
to ask for help. You're not afraid to ask for help. I see you asking for help. It
Yes.
impresses me. I like it. I watch and follow you for that because I'm like, that chick asks for what she needs and she
That's
gets it.
so true.
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge with today's world is like they have that guilt of like if they ask for help, then in turn they like owe this or they owe that,
Yes.
which I don't feel I'm eternally grateful. But if I need help,
Yeah.
when we had the twins and I was like, hey, I need meals. Like if I need help, I'm just gonna ask. You're either going to be, hey, yeah, I want to help that person, or you're not, and both are okay.
Speaking of help, I mentioned last week that I had to make a decision about the sheep. And so the guy that we were originally partnering with the sheep, Justin, you actually know Justin. He's a forager. He teaches us a lot about plant identification. So
Yes.
friendly around the area. We were partnering up on this sheep and I called him and said, "Hey, I just can't deal with this right now." And he said, "I'll come and get them." He came today and picked up the sheep. The sheep are not here anymore. That's a little bit of a sad movement forward, but it is a movement forward and onward and forward we go, right?
Hmm.
So, did you ever get to see them?
I did not
Oh,
online, but
yeah,
I
of
didn't get to
course.
see them.
The Baugh brothers have left the arena. So last week we came across a couple of unanswered questions. One of those was about hash. And do you cook hash? Are you a hash cooker?
I do cook hash, and Kristen and I actually, when I listened to the podcast, I messaged her and said, "That is not what I call hash. That's what I call a casserole."
So tell me what you call hash then before I look it up on or I call it the unanswered question.
So I call hash like a breakfast
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
casserole
Yeah.
that would be would be potatoes and
Uh-huh.
onions or root vegetables, some kind, and onions in a skillet. That's hash.
Okay. So like breakfast hash, like if you go to a restaurant and you have eggs and hash, that's what you're calling hash.
Yes, yes.
Because I definitely grew up with the idea of like basically anything you throw into a pot that's just like all cooked with a bunch of vegetables and meat, that's going to be a hash type of thing. And anything cooked like that is a hash type of thing. But I also understand your version because I've eaten hash at restaurants, eggs and hash and bacon or whatever. So I looked it up, and what I came across was the word hash comes from the French word hacher, which means to chop. Basically, hash is a combination of chopped or diced meat, potatoes, and spices. Although corned beef is often associated with St. Patrick's Day, corned beef hash is a very
Mm,
popular comfort food for many people in America. See, to me, I think comfort food is the key thing here. I think
yeah.
that, like, that it had, okay, they said chopped up vegetables, chopped up meat, but it's this like meaty vegetable comfort food.
And that's interesting because I would never think of corned beef as a hash because actually I have corned beef going in my crock pot at home right now because I knew I was
I've
coming
never made that
here.
before.
And so it's corned beef, cabbage, onions, and carrots.
Uh
So it's
huh.
funny that that would be the description because I would never identify corned beef with a hash because I've always made it in a crock pot with cabbage and carrots.
What is traditionally in hash? The essence of hash is meat that's already cooked, potatoes for a starch, and usually onions for sweetness. And then it also says you could put a couple of egg yolks on top of it or a couple of fried eggs on top of it. So then you get back into the breakfast thing. And then I think that like there's an Americanization to the idea of like
Yeah,
breakfast hash because it's possible because in other countries they put an egg on top of everything. So an egg's not just breakfast food, right?
it's true.
So I think go to Ireland, go to Scotland, go to other places where they were making a corned beef hash and then putting an egg on it. And then somehow in America, it turned into a breakfast hash casserole type hash potatoes, like we have potatoes and meat. And so I thought that was interesting because cross culturally, well, how did we actually come up with the concept of hash? And what do you, when you come to your dinner table, what does your family call hash? What would you describe a hash as? I've heard people talk about using like tomatoes in their hash, different kinds of grain in their hash, so I think that it can kind of be anything, but I think that I would say that the best way for me to describe it, whether we're talking about corned beef hash or breakfast hash, is this idea that the essence of hash is meat that's already cooked, potatoes for starch, and usually some kind of onions, right? So if you
Yeah.
think about like you're going to put that, you might put eggs with that, or you might put some other types of things like carrots. you're always going to have meat, you're always going to have potatoes, you're always going to have onions. That's a pretty
Yeah,
basic meal if you think about it. Like every family is going to cook that. It's kind of like beans and rice here in southern America, in southern Texas.
that's true.
Well, in other places where they had mostly potatoes, pieces of meat they had left, well, you could cook it with some onions and some potatoes because they could grow onions and potatoes and make
Yeah.
something really simple.
That's interesting because we actually, so one of the hashes that we make on a regular basis in our house is using good oils and parsnip. I actually use root vegetables instead of potatoes. So I use
Yeah.
parsnip and sometimes carrots with a bacon grease and onion. And we make like it's a delicious hash.
You mentioned to me, I know you've been practicing a little bit of the autoimmune protocol diet as well, but you mentioned to me that you can't eat white potatoes. Is that why? Is that part of the reason why you've just gotten better at using other types of root vegetables?
I have because I grew up in the South. I mean, I'm a Alabama, Florida girl, and so
Hmm.
potatoes is part of every meal, every single meal. And so for me, comfort wise, I have to find something that's comparable.
Yeah.
And cauliflower is not always it. I
Yeah.
really like the parsnips. I find that those are a really good replacement. So I need to find other things, the cassava root,
Yeah.
other
That's a good
things
one.
that I can have that are potato like.
I've been very grateful that my sweet potatoes did so good in the garden this year because we ate a lot of sweet potatoes over the last 3 months during this autoimmune thing. And so that was my potato option. Do you eat sweet potatoes?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my okay. So then the other unanswered question we had was we were talking about the ducks and we were pronouncing, I was always pronouncing it Muscovy duck, and Sean would pronounce it Muscovy duck. And so I've got the pronunciation here. I think we should listen and then see if we can repeat it or
Yeah.
Muscovy, Muscovy, Muscovy.
Muscovy duck.
Muscovy duck.
Okay.
So as opposed to, I'm like, I had inside my mind Muscovy that it's some kind of French Canadian duck. Seriously, that's where like their name is Igari, which is
Yeah.
French for stray, right? They're stray ducks, and I this is a Muscovy duck. Like I don't know why. I know
Very
that's got to be
Texas.
standing like a Canadian accent. What's a Canadian accent? So instead of that, it's a Muscovy duck. But that actually makes sense because covey is a bird, like a small group of birds is a covey, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm making some more things up. Maybe there's some more things we need to look up, like what is a covey and so but that leads me to we started the conversation last week. And of course you got like 12 shout outs on last week's
I
episode.
know I was the star. I felt so important. I felt
It's
like the
kind of funny.
VIP
Right.
listening. I was like, what? It's me again.
And then magically she appears at the dinner table the next week. It's like there's some kind of mycelium network of interconnectedness going on up in our world or something like that.
Oh, so true.
But the question I had for you was they mentioned you about ducks because they were getting ducks and you have ducks. And so I'm new to the duck scene with our stray ducks that have showed up. And then we collected a duck off of Ocean Drive, the city duck. But you have ducks. Tell us about your
We
ducks.
do. So we have quite a few ducks. We have several different ones. We have Cayuga ducks. My goal from the beginning has been rainbow eggs. And so you can't have the rainbow without having a Cayuga duck because they lay like a grayish black. Their first couple eggs are truly black and then they go gray. And so, yeah, we have runner ducks, Cayuga ducks. We have several different varieties. I could name them all. But I thought that I was a chicken mama, and I have found that I'm really partial to the ducks, and I just love them so
I like these ducks
much.
too. I mean, they do big giant shits, but they don't, and they're out here on the farm. It doesn't matter because they're not doing it anywhere that's bothering us.
Yeah.
They're super chill. They're not
They're
noisy. They just kind of peck around and eat things out of the grass. They're not, we're not feeding them, although they'll come up and eat from underneath when we feed the cows and stuff like
yeah.
that. But they're not getting fed necessarily. What I want to know is where do you keep them? Like, where do they live? How do you get their eggs? Like, how, because we just have stray ducks.
Okay. So the eggs, they will do their best to hide them any way that they can. Their goal is for you to never find the eggs. So we keep ours, they just free range in our yard. They run all over. Their poops are disgusting. I always say it's like a bomb. Like you hear it,
Yeah.
like, and you're like, oh. So that's part of, some people don't want ducks because they say they're messy. However, because we do have a smaller homestead, we have their water set up on the other side of a fence. So they have to like stick their heads through to get to the water. They're not making this huge mess, in the yard all the time. We have it very backyard friendly. Um, so then they have like a little home that they go into at night. And once they learn that that's their
So
home,
what's their home? Is it like a doghouse? What is it?
it would be a glorified doghouse. It's a little
Uh-huh.
coop that we built, but I mean, it's
Is
probably
it
the
up off the
size.
ground? Is it on the ground?
It's up off the ground, and they have a
Mhm.
little ramp that they can
Okay.
walk, and I
Okay.
keep wood chips in there so they
Uh-huh.
have something to lay on.
Uh-huh.
And they'll just waddle up once they learn. Getting them in the house, because ducks are scared of everything.
Right.
So at first they were so scared, and you have to actually force them in it. After a few days, they realize, okay, this is where we're supposed to go when it gets dark, and they're really good at following the rules.
Uh-huh.
They go in, we close the door, and once they learn that's their home, they'll go back there and lay the eggs. And
Okay.
after
So it's
that,
that part's no different than chickens.
yeah,
Are you raising yours from baby ducks?
we are. Yes.
Okay. So how do they not like start there as that's their home to begin with?
So when we first got them, we ordered them, and so we had them as babies, but they're inside, and then we move them out to kind of a smaller area,
Mm-hmm.
just for safety. And so it's not until they're kind of teenagers that they start having free range of the yard. And
Right.
so it was kind of a learning, like, hey, this is your new home,
Right.
and
Got it.
now they know. And we're actually hatching. We have new ducks hatching next week.
Very nice. And you're a surrogate mom of Kristen and Sean's ducks too? What's happening with the duck scene? I've seen her with some pictures where she's hugging ducks. Tell me what's actually happening with the ducks at Kristen
Right.
and Sean's.
So I am a surrogate mom. They really wanted to have these ducks, and Sean fell in love with the idea of like having the ducks and different ways you can prepare them. And I said, hey, just keep them at my house. That sounds like a great idea. However, Kristen is quickly falling for these ducks. So I am a surrogate mom that doesn't get to see my children yet.
So
She's
you're waiting to see how
falling.
this is going to go.
Yes, Sean actually went today. It's funny you bring that up. He actually was at Tractor Supply FaceTiming me today to get all of the supplies. So they're going to stay for an extended period. We'll see if the ducks ever come
Ever
to
come to your
actually
house.
live with me.
Okay, but she's getting attached to ducks that they're planning to use for meat ducks.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she
I'm curious to hear the rest of this story.
I think it's gonna go. Yeah, I'm interested. I think we need to have them back. Like, you need to have
Yeah.
them back.
Yeah.
Because she said she is visualizing them, as they are going to be food. But we are gonna, keep a breeding pair to continue to have duck babies.
Right.
So she says she's working on her visualization of them being meat ducks, and we'll see how it goes. I think Kristen is getting very attached, and I think Sean is too.
I look forward to hearing more about their adventures and also more about all of the animal adventures you have going on. It's been a really good week of cooking. You guys know that I'm doing the cooking now and I'm learning things. So I went across the street to the big meat freezer that we have on the farm. I don't usually go and get that. Most of the time I'm getting my meat from the farmer's market by myself. I didn't ask anybody else's direction on how to do it. And I seasoned it with some onion salt, garlic powder,
Okay.
and I turned it on and I cooked it. And then I came back and I had a chunk of backstrap and it was perfect. And it was the perfect thing for me to have because this is the kind of thing I've said I want to just have meat cooked, right? So then I can eat it all week long, or I can mix it in with some vegetables, or I can roast some vegetables on the side and then just have a wrap or whatever. And that's basically what I've been doing with this just chunk of meat. And it's giving me, it's like having lunch meat.
Yeah.
Except that instead of buying lunch meat from the grocery store, I'm just cooking a piece of meat and then having it available for me. So I make wraps every single day and I use the coconut wraps. I get them from Our Natural Grocers, but you can also get them from Thrive, which I'm ready to do my Thrive order now because they
Okay.
have the best stuff. Like they really do. Like that's some of the quality things that I really want. I need to get it from them. But what I found was I accidentally started an introduction to something that I didn't necessarily plan on introducing but it's going to be my first introduction. I'm very serious about this autoimmune thing. I'm trying to take it to the 120 days as much as I can. And when and if I start reintroducing things, I'm going to introduce one thing and then focus on that one as how does that affect my body? And what ended up accidentally happening was I reintroduced curry. And it's because
Yeah.
the wraps that they had at Natural Grocers, they didn't have the plain ones, they only had the curry ones. And for some reason, I had forgotten that curry was a seed and that it's one of the things that they grind the powder and that's how
Okay.
they make curry. And so I went ahead and got that. I have to eat these wraps, right? Because
Yeah.
that's my lunch every day. and I just make it with the wrap, and then I use my coconut-based either my tzatziki sauce or just
Which is
coconut yogurt.
delicious.
Oh, that was right.
It
It's a
was
really,
so
really good
good.
recipe. We dipped our zucchini chips, which weren't even anything other than just sliced up fresh zucchinis. We dipped that in there tonight because I had run out of my other kinds of chips that I like to use. I use all different kinds of autoimmune protocol, like the cassava you mentioned earlier. I like to use those. And so that's on the bottom. And then I usually put some kind of fermented stuff. Do you eat fermented stuff?
I do.
What things do you eat?
So it's funny. I was going to tell you this earlier with the coconut wraps. I really like. You get it at Natural Grocer, and it's the garlic and dill sauerkraut. The kraut that they
Uh-huh.
have.
Uh-huh.
I am just putting that with the steak. So I do the wrap, and
Yeah.
I do the steak, and then I put that garlic and dill kraut on top.
Yeah.
And it's
So basically that's
amazing.
the same thing I do. I use
Yeah.
some kind of fermented stuff. I use things that I buy. My mom just made me some sauerkraut. Before that I had some fermented radishes and turnips. I have pickled okra that I've used. So I use those, and then I put some kind of greens. I've been using greens from my garden, but I also use a mixture of spinach and kale from the grocery store, organic spinach and kale. Do you like what greens do you use?
That's true. I forgot. I do love to top it with arugula. Like
I
I'll grow
love
that in my
arugula.
hydroponic system,
Yes.
so I can grow it year round. And so I have a constant supply of arugula, and it's so spicy
Yes.
when you. Oh,
I have a system. I just got it. Like my mom's friends had loaned one to her. I asked, I was like, what happened with that? Because I knew she wasn't using it anymore. Before my life changed a lot, I had been looking into kind of what you do. What is your hydroponic system? You rent it? Like, how does it work?
So no, I actually purchased it, and I have the lettuce grow system.
Uh-huh.
And I think when you came out a year or so ago, I had two of them. So I have
Yeah.
two of the towers, and they can be inside or outside. If you have them inside, obviously with lights. But I really like that system for me aesthetically because it was going to be in my house. I needed that. There's multiple different kinds of systems, but I really love the lettuce grow. You can do different layers. So you can choose to have only 12 plants, 20, you can
Yeah.
choose how
Yeah.
many. I have two of the 36 plant stands. So I have, the max.
Yeah.
And I just love it. I
And you
mean,
keep it up all the time running in it, and you have fresh greens inside your house all the time?
I do. I keep it up currently. So in the summer, I do put it outside
Okay.
because it does great outside. And
Uh-huh.
so I constantly have, but I find that even in the heat of summer, I can still do like butter crunch lettuce.
That's impressive
It is
because that's the
really.
hard part is keeping the lettuce all year round.
And I keep it, I have, it says it needs full sun, but I do where it's kind of in a partial shade sun situation. I can always move it inside. I usually move it inside in August when the bugs get really bad.
Yeah.
But I have a constant supply. And I also do tomatoes, zucchini, cucumber,
Huh.
peppers. And I like to, because there's 36 plants and we don't need two of those full, I love to put flowers. So then if I have it inside, I've always got fresh flowers that are just, it's
Okay,
so
well, I have to
beautiful.
learn a lot. Not only do I need to learn more about ducks from you, but I have to learn about my indoor growing system because now I have one and
That
it's
is,
coming here and I'm going to get it set up so I
I'm
can have
so
that growing.
excited.
I also made a steak this week, which this one was the one I was the most proud of because I've never cooked a steak in my entire life. I've always relied on a man to cook a steak. I'm being real. I've always relied, but now I was like, you know what? I'm cooking myself a steak. And I actually had a friend come out and he came out and did some gardening with me and helped me all over the property. And we just spent a really nice evening talking. And I was like, let me cook you a steak. And and I was like, do you know how to cook a steak? And he was like, not very well. And so so my parents had told me, and I got my steak from Turkey Hollow, and it was a sirloin steak, and it was a nice
Okay.
fat size one, like a little bit of, I guess it was probably an inch, and I would say it might have been like a 10 ounce. So we both had about 5 ounces of steak to eat. And I cooked it in the cast iron skillet on medium. We have a gas stove, 4 minutes on one side, 4 minutes on the other side. And then I let it sit on the plate for 5 minutes. And it was perfect medium rare. Perfect.
Yep,
I
that
was
sounds
so
right.
freaking proud of myself. I seasoned it, same thing I did with the venison backstrap. I just put some garlic powder and some onion salt, and that's all I seasoned it with. I was so proud of myself. I dug into that steak, and then here we're having these great conversations, and we're eating this beautiful salad with the rainbow radishes like I made for us
Mhm.
tonight
Mhm.
on there with pretty carrots all from the garden. And I had tossed up some roasted squash, onions. I got lots of onions, of course, cabbage. That's what it was. I had a
Okay.
cabbage and I made this delicious little side, and it was such a good treat, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm learning to not be afraid at all of cooking, and I'm just trying new things, which is why I pulled up this recipe for us to cook tonight. And when I sent it over to you, what did you say about, because curry, but you made a comment, you're like, I live on curry, or like, so like it's
I
my
did.
favorite.
I was like, oh my gosh. So I have Moroccan roots. And I was like,
That's what you said. Yeah.
curry, that is yours.
Yeah, I had a feeling that you would really like the curry idea. I remember that one time you're a homeschooling mom and you do like homeschool co-op type of thing, or home co-op type
I
things.
try to participate.
And that part I completely understand. That part of us is also alike. But I remember you did this really cool like Moroccan dinner thing, and you've been
Yes.
talking about wanting to come out here and do some kind of Moroccan dinner thing. And so I thought you
Yes.
would probably like that. Curry is just one of those things that is very likable. And so I was excited to try to find that. And I went over to Aislynn at the farmer's market and picked up some beef from him. I got some big chunks of beef stew meat. Okay, normally I would say I like to cook with my friends at the dinner table, but I looked into this recipe and it said it was going to take 8 hours. And I was like, oh shit, I don't think we're going to be together for 8 hours. And weirdly enough, it was another instant pot recipe, but they were cooking it in the slow cooker.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to figure that out for and I totally think we could have done this in a completely different way. I think we could have done it with the instant pot normal, where it would have cooked in an hour or two.
It is
But
possible. I will say that I cook with curry a lot, and I do feel I've done the Instant Pot. It's just not the same. Something about the
doesn't
curry
absorb as
and
well.
that traditional, yeah, like it doesn't absorb the flavors. It's definitely not my first choice if I can cook it in the slow cooker.
Well, it turned out really good. I did the recipe a little bit different. And here it does have curry in it. So the curry in the wraps and the curry in this has now officially become my reintroduction is curry. So I'm doing curry over the next week or so. I'm going to eat the rest of this curry. It's going to be leftover dinner. And
Yeah.
then I'm going to see how my stomach reacts to how my headaches, how skin stuff. We talked about having those whiteout things that I've mentioned
Yes.
before.
Yeah.
You know, anything that I can notice. Other things you've said notice other things. There are other things that you've noticed like symptom wise that like are indicators for you.
I kind of get towards the end of the day almost where I feel like I'm starving when
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
when I'm not on this diet, where it's like it just hits me out of the blue and I cannot be satisfied no matter how much I eat. I feel like I need to eat a lot, almost sugar drops,
Yeah. Yeah.
arrhythmia,
Arrhythmia. Yeah.
blood pressure, just all kinds of symptoms that I feel so good eating this way.
Yeah, it's definitely clearing my mind. So
Yeah.
the few things that I've done a little bit differently on this recipe was it called for 3 pounds of chuck roast. I just used 1 pound. And then that meant that I went ahead and I decreased the amount of stuff I used on everything. I used coconut oil, an onion from the garden, of course, garlic cloves that I chopped up really thinly sliced them, and then also ginger that I thinly sliced as well, and then a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, fish sauce, carrots, sweet potatoes, turnips, all from the garden, turmeric, the curry. I did go ahead and use a full can of the coconut milk. And it also called for some bone broth, but I actually used water because it says bone broth or water. And I don't have a ton of bone broth right now, which is something I'm going to have to work my way towards. We used to have a
Mm.
lot of bone broth, but I just don't have a ton of that right now. And so I'm going to work my way in that direction. But I don't think, I mean, it didn't seem to make a difference, right?
Yeah, I thought it was very flavorful. It was delicious.
Yeah, it was good. And so the way that it told me to make it in the Instant Pot was to saute the beef, right? I saute that, brown it, take that out, then do the onions and the garlic and the ginger till you get the
Okay.
aroma smell, right?
Yeah.
Then you add in your sweet potatoes and all of those other vegetables. I also added in squash because I've got a ton of squash right now. So I put in
Yeah.
zucchini. I thought those were great. I like the little soft flavor of the zucchini in it. And then you add in all your liquids, your fish sauce and your coconut cream and your apple cider vinegar and all of that stuff. And then you turn it on to low, slow cooker on your Instant Pot. And I cooked it for 8 hours. And I went and checked on it from time to time.
You are so much better than me. So my Instant Pot recipe would have gone kind of like similar. I will follow the recipe. However, I don't follow the directions. I mean, that's where the Unhinged Homesteader came in.
Well, I'm starting now, so I
just-
know eventually I won't be doing
I
directions
just,
anymore.
I'm like, oh, simmer. I don't have time for that. Oh, simmer the onion. I just throw literally everything in